guys, how are you?
How are you?
Good morning.
This is Lumen, the first device for hacking your metabolism. With just one breath, Lumen tells you what you're currently burning for energy. Burn.
I'm gonna go print off some stuff for you.
At the home.
You didn't? What happened?
Well, you know this guy, he won't give you nothing. The only thing he says, end the text message. He doesn't even pick up the phone. So you have to price was higher than this. And it's unbelievable, it's possible.
I mean, I believe that the price, they could have gotten a higher price, but still his way of handling that was
Yeah, no, I still have
not great at all.
Yeah, I guess either it's too busy or can handle the calls, because the one, same broker, same agent. They look like small company,
Yeah,
he probably didn't have time. He didn't have time. You know, need to report.
still, but that's, I'm sorry. How long have you been looking?
This one. And then I lost some. So stupid reason. One I lost because guys, no inspection, no option. One I lost, you put 10,000 option money.
Really?
10,000 option money. And then I lost, you know, 100% cash. That's happening right now.
That's crazy.
It's happening right now.
So different.
100% cash.
Just get you. All over the spectrum of our music. It's just like in, I'm kind of with you. It's very strange.
Everyone's expecting.
Everybody sign in? Oh, okay. I got it. Oh, look at you, you're so good, you're the only one that, like, the only one? You're the only one who followed it. You guys are just so eager to get knowledge, you don't care about the sign-in, that's all.
He just said I'm not eager.
You're not here?
Eager.
Oh, you're not
That's what you
eager?
said. That's what you said.
Oh, that's
I'm
what
not
I just said. No, you are detail oriented. So you stopped and did the detail first, and then you got to work.
I didn't have to be eager. I got here.
There's nothing like there now. I'm trying to replace it. It's not gonna happen.
Starts printing on the computer.
Wow. It happens. You love this, you're next.
I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric, baby, when I turn it on. All through my city, off in my home. Crying up no ceiling when we in our summer. I've got that sunshine in my pocket. Got that good soul in my feet. Feel that color in my pocket. It's drops. Ooh, I can take my eyes off it. Moving so phenomenally. On like a baby rocket. So don't stop.
Or the stack stops.
Already know. Can see but you when you dance, dance. Spin up on you, so just dance, dance, dance. All things I shouldn't do, you dance, dance, dance. I said to make that so keep dancing. So just dance, so just dance, dance, dance. Ooh, it's something magical. It's in your hair, it's in my blood, it's stretched along. Don't need no reason, don't be in control. I'm feeling when I'm in my zone. Is it daddy sunshine? Are you getting frustrated? Set my feet, feel that holy, my body like it wants. Take my eyes off it, moving so phenomenally. On like the way I get crazy, I'm outside for the fight.
He doesn't have a low range.
I don't know a lot of this music, but I definitely don't know any of that beat. Sounds low.
Well, yeah, we definitely can. You never see that performance? Yeah, that product. Yeah. So, you know. You might, the song you prefer, you might actually like better than this guy based on what you're saying. If Gianna's up for it, she could put it on me for it. But, because with Chris Stapleton, Stapleton's got such a low voice. So watching the two of them try to, they kind of both sing each other's songs. That when they were first stepping into like each other's music, there were those moments where like you could tell that like their voices were just going off, but like this one crazy guys. But watching him with the country music awards, you realize like truly he like what a crazy talent performer he really is.
Yeah. I don't really like his music.
Are you?
It's just not my style.
Let's make it. Are you? I was so bummed I saw that Garth Brooks was coming to perform here in Dallas in July, and I was like, ah, because we're going to be out of town. And I told my husband, I'm like, listen, Garth Brooks, I've seen him twice. And I was like, I would see him every single time I get the opportunity to. I don't think there's hardly anyone that's better performer live than him. He's amazing.
I'm not gonna lie, my taste in country is more of the like city boy kind
Yeah,
of
at work, by community.
wannabe country.
Okay.
Yeah, like Luke Bryan.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's so mixed now in country music. It's kind of cool in my opinion.
My thing is though, to me, it doesn't matter. Like, a great performer is a great performer. And that's like the thing with Garth is that like, I've seen where he does acoustic and then like with the full thing, it doesn't matter. Like, there's very few people who perform live as talented as he does.
Get your feet, Dennis.
Yeah, I love Garth. I just didn't understand his,
Weird Chris.
weird Chris thing.
Yeah. A moment you can skip.
So this is what we're talking about, where Chris has a low voice and then Justin has the high voice.
Used to spend my nights out in the ballroom.
But Justin is incredibly talented too.
And brought me back. The end too far gone. Tennessee, West Virginia. You're a sweet strawberry wine. You're a wild as brandy. I stay strong on your love all the time. I look for love in all the same old places.
This one isn't bad.
No, but it's such a contrast to the, like, I think like the feel of the original songs. I mean, it's not that it's not good, it's just that like Chris Stapleton makes you feel like you were at the bar, like at
Yeah.
the bottom of the bottle. Justin Timberlake makes you feel like you might have stopped by a high-end grocery store.
For the Reds.
Yeah.
All right, well, I could listen to that stuff all day long, so we probably have to stop and get to work. All right. So what have you learned so far in the last, I mean, really in the last day, because you guys learned a lot yesterday between contracts and command and all that good stuff.
It sure was a lot.
It was the longest day so far, right?
Say again?
It was the longest day so
It was a
far.
long ass day. Oh, I love it. Some days are like that,
Yeah.
without a doubt. All right, so we're gonna talk about addendums today, or any special forms. You should still have from yesterday, and I didn't put it in here because you should have it from yesterday, the third-party addendum. Third-party financing. If you don't have it, that's okay. Just watch up on here. Good morning, Miss Tawana.
Good morning.
All right, so third-party financing addendum is only used when
I need to bring it on.
you need financing of some sort. That is not a hard money loan. Hard money is not financing. Hard money is cold, hard cash with a lot of fees. So you gotta tell the seller what your buyer is doing. What is your buyer, how is your buyer gonna pay for their house? So you've got conventional, you got a Texas Veterans Loan. You've got FHA loan, which is a government backed. You've got the VA guaranteed financing, USDA guaranteed financing, both of those they can do for 0% down. That does not mean they don't have closing costs at the closing table, because they will. Just means they don't have to put down a down payment. Reverse mortgage financing, I've yet to see someone use that for the sake of purchasing a home. Approval of financing, totally different paragraph. Let's go back up here. All right, let's say right now in this market, most people are using conventional. The reason being with an FHA loan or the VA loan, they have the right of refusal if they don't get lender approval due to the appraisal. So if the appraisal doesn't match the sales price, an FHA does not have to go forward, nor does a VA. They can get out of the deal. Okay? So a lot of
Okay,
people like.
hate to ask, but would you say that again?
Yeah, what did I just say? So with an FHA and a VA loan, FHA and VA, and we'll get to that section in just a second. Because there's a clause that says FHA and VA buyers do not have to pay above an appraisal price. That is an out for them.
Okay. I wondered why there were so many, there's so many of those deals that are turned down over conventional, and that's the only reason they're turned down. And I thought, why?
Well,
why is
in
there such a
this
difference?
market, they're being turned down.
Right.
As soon as we get closer to balance, they're gonna come back into play. And as we move
Okay.
towards a buyer's market, they're gonna come back in. It's just right now, sellers are being greedy and they only want a deal that's gonna, a buyer that's going to agree to pay the price they brought in the offer. So in a conventional, we're gonna use the full appraisal waiver. And we can go over that in a bit. I think I've got that form in there too. But for right now, they want cash or they want a conventional.
Okay.
That's all they want to play with right now. So typically, you're gonna have a first mortgage. Well, not typically, you will have a first mortgage. Loan of the principal amount of. Now this is where people get a little confused. So again, let's say like yesterday, our price is 420,000, yes? They were putting 20,000 down. So the loan amount is 400. The loan amount is what goes there in that first line. Due in full in, it could be a 10-year note, could be a 15-year note, could be a 20-year note, could be a 30-year note. Ask the lender what they're setting up for your buyer. I fill out this in almost this entire paragraph just by asking the lender. I like my buyer. But buyers are liars. We kind of joke in this field, buyers are liars. So I don't want to go by what the buyer tells me. I want to go by the person that's actually funding the loan. Okay. So due in, let's say it's 30 years with an interest not to exceed. So right now we know interest rates are sitting at about 5.25. So if my buyer can't qualify for his loan if it were to jump up to say 5.4, whatever that max number is, or whatever the lender tells me to put there is the interest rate I'm gonna put there. Now, why does that exist? I don't know if you guys remember this thing called 9/11. Y'all were probably still in diapers, but 9/11 happened. And our,
Kids and
I mean, we had a volatile, jump and everything at that point, right? So let's say this was his max that he would be able to afford the loan at. Let's say something happened in the world, he wasn't locked in, and the rate jumped to 6. He's like, well, I can't afford that payment. And the lender says he can't afford that payment. That's an out for him, for my buyer, for your buyer. Okay? With interest not to exceed that for the first, again, you put the same number of years in line 2 that you put, or 3 that you put in line 2. With the origination charges, which is what a lender charges them to give them the loan, as shown on a buyer's loan estimate for the loan not to exceed X% of the loan. most lenders today know, look, we can't screw these people over with large origination charges. So they took what was probably 2 or 2.5%, and I'm just throwing out a number there, and they whittled it down and called it different things. And so now the official loan origination charges are usually no more than 1% of the sales price. But again, I asked the lender. I go, how much am I supposed to put in here? Let the lender help you answer that, okay? Right now, we're not doing second mortgages very much, or I haven't seen them. Maybe they're out there, but I haven't seen them. And if you're using that conventional, you don't worry about anything else, because those are just choices. You just fill out one of these, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you're done. Go to paragraph number 2, approval of financing. Approval of financing described above will be deemed to have been obtained when buyer approval and property approval are obtained. So this is a totally kind of a two-parter. So this contract is subject, and you will click on that if they're using a loan, is subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. If the buyer cannot obtain approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within. And again, I go to the lender and I say, how many days do you need to confirm buyer approval? They'll say, well, I've got all their stuff. They've turned it in. I've actually started their loan process. I only need about 10 more days. Okay, so then I'll put 10 days in there. If he says, I have nothing from these people, I have not gotten any information other than I got a basic amount of info to do a credit check on them, I'm gonna need about 21 days. So then I'm gonna put 21 days. Now, remember when we're kind of talking about all the different option periods that we actually have in the contract? There's more than one way to get out of the deal. That's a way to get out of the deal. If buyer cannot get approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller, contract will terminate, and the earnest money will be refunded. So many people get so locked in on just the option period that that's the only tool you have to get out of the deal, Mr. Buyer. And it's not. It's not. It gets trickier as you lose some of those contingencies due to timelines. But there's ways to get out of things if you absolutely need to within the words of the contract. For whatever reason, someone may get to check this box, which says this contract is not subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. So here's what I've seen with that. Buyer has $3 million in cash for whatever crazy reason. He doesn't want to utilize that cash. He wants it to stay wherever it is. He's going to get a loan to buy this house. So he can check that box. We can check that box for that buyer because the lender says this is a no-brainer. He's already approved because of how much money he's got sitting over here to buy that house. He could use this cash if he wanted to. It's liquid. He could touch it. He's just choosing not to for whatever reason. Now there's a B here, and even though we don't mark anything in it, it's critical because this is a two-part. The buyer approval is first, property approval is second. So if the buyer's lender determines that the property does not satisfy lender's underwriting requirements for the loan to include appraisal, insurability, and lender required repairs. Did you hear that yesterday? Did we talk about that yesterday? Just do this and y'all know you actually listened yesterday. Because remember, it has to be insurable. And a lender's not gonna, if the roof is trash, they aren't gonna put the loan on it. Buyer, not later than 3 days before the closing date, may terminate this contract by giving seller a notice for termination and a copy of a written statement from the lender giving the reasons why the lender's determination is of property not approved. if buyer terminates under this paragraph, the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. If the buyer does not terminate under this paragraph, property approval is deemed to have been obtained. So part of this is a problem when the appraisers have gotten so far behind because the market was just 300 miles an hour. So we had to be careful with some of our things there. Fairway has a company, they can get the appraisals done ASAP. So your buyer will know, am I paying over? Because I'm using that waiver that we're going to talk about, or am I not? Now let's say back on page 1, we clicked FHA loan. There are 2 sections of an FHA loan. And all it is a different product. That's one of the hardest things I had to learn about mortgages is they sell different products. I just thought everybody got a loan all in the same way when I first started. So with an FHA, you can have a 203B or a 203K. I don't know if there's I think there's a 205 out there, but I don't remember. But these are the 2 you see the most. 203B is just a straightforward loan with an FHA. 203K involves rehab costs. So if the house is good enough to get a loan, the buyer says, but I want to change the flooring, I want to change the kitchen countertops. Something that simple. They can roll the costs of doing that update into their loan, and it's called a 203K. Again, it wouldn't be anything like a roof, foundation, or anything that prevents insurability. It's more of just a house update. So a 203B or 203K goes here. How do I know which one they're using? Ask the lender. Let the lender help you fill out this form. If it's an insured loan of not less than, that's the loan amount. X number of years, not to proceed whatever percent like we just talked about. These number of years, luckily they're right next to each other, it's the same. With the origination charges, not to exceed, right now we're putting 1% on most of those. Your person has a VA loan. Again, talk to the lender. Mr. Lender, what would you like me to put in this paragraph? They will tell you. In this, because a VA may not or does not, that same group calls me like every morning at this time. They are. This amount, the dollar amount of the loan may be the full price of the home because they don't have to put down a down payment. They can if they choose, but they don't have to. And again, number of years, the percent interest rate for the same number of years, 1% of the loan. So a lot of this repeats, it's just which product are they using? Okay. USDA loans are loans for agricultural areas or areas far out from the city, big cities. Doesn't mean they're buying an ag property, just means where the property is located is considered qualifying under the USDA. Again, it's a government loan.
My house.
Your neck of the woods, yeah.
Yes.
We very lovingly call it the boondocks. You live out in the boondocks.
And you would be correct.
I'm correct. All right, so really, when you come back in here on an FHA or a VA, The number in here is typically the sales price. Yet confirm with the lender what they want you to put in here. Okay. Really, that's all there is to that one. People just sign it and we go forward. Okay. Let's go to the addendum concerning the right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. This might take you a second to find that. Probably towards the back half of your paper. You got it?
It's,
Well, I'm gonna find it.
yeah.
Okay. So when I started in this business, we never used this form. Originally, if we had an appraisal issue, we had already written in special provisions of the offer that house must appraise, or we started acting like attorneys and we said, should the house not appraise, buyers willing to bring 5,000 over, or whatever the case may be. And then Bob, after a while, said, you guys aren't attorneys, you can't write that type of language in there. You need to call the title attorneys and let a title attorney give you the language. So you had to call them, give them the situation, say, may I have the proper language so I can put it in special provisions. So then we did that for a while. Title attorneys really got tired of answering those phone calls because every agent in the Metroplex started calling them. So then they created an appraisal waiver. We never used this in the beginning of my business 10 years ago. We never had to. Because whatever we wrote in the third party or in the special provisions seemed to hold, and it worked a lot of the time. What this says, again, our sales price was $420 that we're playing with. It appraises for $400. That's a delta or a difference of $20,000. It used to be that the seller and buyer had options. They could renegotiate the price, or the seller could come down. Let's start with that one. The seller could agree to bring the price down to $400. Seller and buyer could agree to negotiate, like a halfway point. Mr. Seller, if you'll come down 10, I'll come up 10 in cash and we'll just still close at the $420. Seller can say, I'm not moving. I want $420. It's what you said you were bringing me no matter what. Buyer says, I don't have to. I'm going to terminate the contract. So we had all sorts of different scenarios, every single transaction. Every transaction was different. Well, as it became a more substantial seller's market, sellers said, you're bringing the money no matter what. And that's where the full waiver comes, number one. So if you promised me, Mr. Buyer, that you were bringing $420, you're bringing me $420. This confirms that you know that and that you will do that. Check number one, it's a full appraisal waiver. A partial waiver says, My buyer has 10K to play with. All the extra reserve cash he's got. So a partial waiver says as long as this appraises for at least 410, I will bring an extra 10 to give you your 420, Mr. Seller. Does everybody understand that? Partial waiver means I have a limited amount of money I can play with. So if it appraises for less than our sales price, as long as it's within $10,000 or less, I'll bring you the difference. If it's literally $1 more, he can say, nope, I'm getting out. That was my limit. That's what the partial waiver says. Okay. There's an additional waiver, number 2, not really getting accepted right now, although it may be changing very soon if it hasn't started already. Number 3, I guarantee you this never in this market has worked. But it's just giving the buyer options. Number 3 says, I'm buying an additional right to terminate under 2B of the third-party financing addendum. Do you remember the buyer approval paragraph on the third party we just went over? Buyer may terminate the contract within X number of days of the effective date if the appraised value according to appraisal is less than X. So you may have your option period, but you're buying another option period that relates to the appraisal. And companies like Fairway are able to get their appraisals done quite quickly so that it may not get done in your 5-day option period, but let's say on day 7, it comes back and it says it's way low. I mean, you don't have the extra cash, Mr. Buyer. Here's another out for you. Because it's another easy out, potential easy out, sellers don't want it. They're like, nope, you said you're bringing $550 for my $420,000 house. I want $550. And that's just what's been happening in this market. I can't wait for it starting to change when we can do number 2 a lot more often. Or number 3 at all. You know? Everybody signs. You move on. Let's go to lead-based paint. All right, everybody there? There's an addendum to the residential, well, this one's a lease, but just do the same thing as a buyer. If the house is built before 1978, it may contain lead-based paint. Lead from paint, paint chips, and dust can pose health hazards if not managed properly. Lead exposure is especially harmful to young children and pregnant women. Before renting or buying a pre-1978 house, leaseors or landlords must disclose the presence of any known lead-based paint and or lead-based paint hazards inside the dwelling. Lessees, the tenants, must also receive a federally approved pamphlet on lead poisoning prevention. You should go to leadpaint.gov And it'll probably give you that. Something.gov. And there'll be a form in there somewhere. So disclosure, the presence of lead paint or other lead-based paint hazards, check A or B. The landlord knows of the following hazards. B, the landlord has no knowledge of the hazards. Again, this could be the same for a purchase. Seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint hazards. I don't think I've ever seen A checked in my whole decade of working. I see this one all the time. Because that's the seller's out, or that's the landlord's out. Unbelievable. They also haven't paid anybody to come in and take a look at it either. They're just saying, no, they don't. Records or reports available to the landlord or seller. There's a different one that'll have seller in there. Landlord has provided tenant with all available records and reports pertaining to lead-based paint. It may be that he has a report that confirms there is no lead-based paint. That's great. He just needs to give it to the buyer. Okay. So your buyer or the seller or the landlord fills out a lot of this. Again, landlord/seller has no reports or records pertaining to lead-based paint. Tenant or buyer's acknowledgement. Buyer has received copies of information located in paragraph B. This will be any disclosures. Tenant has received a pamphlet entitled "Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home." Agents notice to the landlord. Brokers and agents to the lease or the sale. Notify the landlord/seller that the seller must provide tenant or buyer with EPA approval on lead-based poisoning prevention. Complete this addendum. Disclose any known lead-based paint or hazards. Deliver all records, reports to tenant/buyer pertaining to lead-based paint, and retain a copy of this addendum for at least 3 years. That's the agent's notice to a landlord or seller. Pretty unusual. Certificate of accuracy, we all presume that this is true. Now, here's the fun part. Presume that's seller, listing broker, agent. Oh, look. That's his agent, selling agent, listing agent. This is you. You have to acknowledge this form as well, that the tenant or buyer was notified or not notified of lead-based paint hazards. Back when I was a little kid, we definitely had houses built before 1978. And there was always that goofy kid in class. Right? You always have one little goofy kid in class and you're like, are you eating lead-based paint chips? Because it would flake off of the baseboards and kids would put everything in their mouths. Like, are you eating lead-based paint chips? Stop it. Stop it. No, I don't know what I'm doing. Let's go to a regular amendment, and it just says amendment. So if you have an offer, an offer is accepted. What happens next?
Then you go to the title number.
We want to execute the offer. Now it becomes a contract. Okay? Until this happens, you have an offer. or a counter offer in play. Only, and I'm emphasizing this because I get this a lot. And you don't want to walk into Bob's office and say you have a contract when only you have is an offer you're negotiating. Because he'll say, wait a minute, I thought you said you had a contract. Well, I do. No, you don't. You're discussing or negotiating an offer until that offer is accepted by all parties and they've initialed and signed everything, then you execute that offer. Now you have a contract. Once you have a contract, you will never touch that again. You will never touch those pages again. If you need to make a change to the contract, then you must use an amendment. That's what this is for. So you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff in the contract. There's places you fill in things and there's places you don't fill in things. This includes all the things you can fill in. So if there's a price change, you have to change what A and B equal to get to the price change in C. So if the price change goes from 420 to 450 for whatever reason, you'd make a change here. You never go back and touch that contract again. If it goes down to say 400, now you've got to adjust these numbers A and B so that A and B equal 400. You also then have to go back and change the third-party financing addendum because the loan amount may now be different. The date in paragraph 9, and we'll get back to this in just a second. The date in paragraph 9 of the contract is changed to closing date. Has to do with the closing date. The amount in 12A1B, do you remember that from yesterday? Have you memorized it yet? That's okay. 12A1B is seller concessions. So in the offer, we wrote that initially we didn't want any seller concessions. We don't need any seller concessions. But now buyer and seller have negotiated a repair. Seller says, Mr. Buyer, I'm going to give you $1,000 at closing. Now we go back and we change paragraph 12A1B to $1,000. Cost of lender repairs, and I haven't had to use this one ever. Cost of lender repairs as itemized in the attached list will be paid as follows. This is if seller and buyer agree to split the cost of the repair. Buyer has paid seller an additional option fee of X for an extension of the unrestricted right to terminate. So remember when we had, remember we had an execution date? We did yesterday, so that was 4/25. Then we had 1, 2, 3 days, so that's 26th, the 27th, and the 28th. At what time does that date end?
5 p.m.
5 p.m. Buyer gets their inspection done. They want to do more due diligence. They're like, I really think we need to get a structural engineer out here to look at the foundation. I can't get him scheduled in 3 days. So I'm going to send a request to the other side saying, will you accept an extension of the option period for another 3 days? We put it in there. Now, did you have to pay an option fee to have an option period? You had to have some type of nominal consideration, right? Here, we usually do like $1. You just need some nominal consideration to have an option period. It cannot be zero in that line. I don't care if it's a quarter, I don't care if it's $500. It has to be something that both parties agree on to extend the unrestricted right to terminate on or before 5 p.m. by such date. So then now we're at 29, 30, May 1st at 5 p.m. And you paid your buyer paid some type of fee to gain that extra 3 days. The buyer can say, you know what? We've done all of our due diligence. It's before the end of the option period. Mr. Seller, we're going to tell you we're done with the option period as using it for a termination possibility. Let's say you're back up on this one. They got their inspection done this date. Nothing major was found. They can then do that and say, hey, Mr. Seller, we don't need those extra days. Date for the buyer to give written notice to seller that buyer cannot obtain buyer approval set forth in the third-party financing addendum. Okay, so maybe that due date to get that approval, remember we were going to put in 10 days or 21 days, whatever on the paragraph B. So let's say, can you give us another 3 days? Okay, buyer and seller agree, put it in there. Other modifications, again, try not to write in this. Let's go back up to 2. In addition to any repairs and treatments otherwise required by the contract, the seller at seller's expense shall complete the following repairs or treatments. If there's 1 or 2 repairs, you can put it in here. But more than likely, in a more balanced market, you may have 4 or 5, and you can't get detail oriented enough in that one box. What do we do? We do a separate sheet of paper called an exhibit. The first one is called Exhibit A. It says, hey, we have 3 repairs. You can't just write it like that. You can't say fix the HVAC, fix the electrical panel, and fix the arbor. Can't say that. It doesn't instruct the seller enough to know what he is expected to do. So off the inspection report, you will copy the description of what that issue is with the HVAC, and you copy and paste it right there. Seller at seller's expense shall repair, let's say it's not cooling enough. So there's a certain temperature differential that should be between when the air blows and how hot or how cool it cools. I'm going to just copy what the inspector said and put it in there. Seller to then repair differential problem. Replace if necessary. I like to write that in there. Electrical panel. I'm not an electrician. I'm going to copy what the inspector said and I'm going to put it in there. Electrical panel has too many pigtails on it. And that's a type of wiring. And they pigtail on 2 wires onto another wire or whatever they call it. Seller to have licensed electrician. And then I put whatever the inspector has put on there as the problem. Arbor repair. Maybe something as simple as get rid of the beehive that's in the arbor, flowers that have grown over the arbor or something like that. So typically, You're not gonna be able to put that much detail in this one little box. So I will put C Exhibit A in this box. Check it, C Exhibit A. My actual descriptions will be on a separate piece of paper. It's just a separate piece of paper. On exhibit, title it Exhibit A, put the address on it, and then copy and paste. Now, your people, your seller does not in any way, shape, or form want you to send the entire inspection report. Do not do that. It's rude. And here's why. Your buyer drops out for whatever reason. Seller has that whole inspection report in his hands. He now has to disclose everything he knows about the property on a new seller's disclosure. In a gentle way, that pisses people off, particularly sellers. So I give instructions when I send an amendment for repairs. Or I only send the pictures or issues that we're asking to be repaired. As a seller or listing agent, I request only, and I do it in writing, only send inspection information regarding specific repairs requested. Do not send the whole report.
I have a question about that, because it happened to me. If you say buy a breakdown because of inspection report, seller agent know that, doesn't the seller have to change the seller disclosure?
That's what I'm saying.
They have to do that.
That's what I'm saying. He gets the inspection report. The buyer drops out.
He only gave an exhibit, not the whole report.
If he has the exhibit, yes, he has to report that.
That's right.
If he's given the whole report, he has to report all of that. And agents, sloppy agents will just, I'll send you the whole report. I'm like, no. And by the time it's in my email box, it's been received. Yeah. Be a good agent and only send them the parts you're asking them to fix. Okay. So this will supersede the contract. Any paragraph in here that gets changed will supersede what's in the contract, meaning this rules. This trumps what's in the initial contract, okay? It needs an execution date, just like the contract did. So once everyone's agreed on the repairs, once everyone's agreed on a date change or something like that, then everybody, or one of the agents then executes it. Okay? Any questions so far? Good on time. What's another form you have sitting in front of you?
Amendment to listing.
This is specific. The amendment to listing is specific for your listing agreement with your seller. It's just the listing agreement, has nothing to do with the contract. Has everything to do with your listing agreement with the seller. So effective X date, maybe you're doing a listing price change. That could be a reduction. That could be an increase. The date the listing ends in paragraph 4. So when you sign that listing agreement, you usually have a start date and an end date. So this would be 4/26/6/1. That's a very short time frame to run a listing. even in this market, because you don't know how long it's gonna take to get to the closing table. This is way too short, so you'll have to keep amending this date and amending this date and amending this date. Forget that. Waste of your time, it's a waste of your seller's time. I put everything out 4 to 6 months. Now, in this market, I keep it fairly short. Sometimes I'll put it out 6 to 8 months. If we're really in a buyer's market, which means sellers' houses are sitting for a very long period of time, I might take that out to a year. Because it used to be, your house stayed on the market for about 4 months, 5 months, and even then, that offer may drop out. So give yourself time so you and your seller don't have to keep redoing this over and over and over. So the date the listing ends, stick it out there in the wind. Owner instructs broker to cease marketing on the property on X date and to resume marketing on this other date. So let's say we've done some showings. The seller or the buyer, prospective buyer feedback has been paint colors are awful. Carpet in the game room is hideous, needs replaced. Buyer or seller says, okay, we've heard this 10 times now. We probably need to do something about it if we want a contract. So they will say, stop all marketing. Give us time to get the painting done, get the new carpet in, and then we will resume marketing. That's all that's saying. Okay. The listing is not terminated. If there's any other paragraph in the listing agreement that needs to change, it changes like that. So maybe that could be a commissions change. Maybe that could be what you're going to pay the non-MLS person who might bring the buyer. It could be a host of things. And then just like your listing agreement, you sign on this side, they sign on that side. Let's look at the backup addendum. Addendum for backup contract. Anybody need a break? Need to go potty or anything? Water? Because this one kind of will blow your mind a little bit, so just. They say taking deep breaths resets the brain. So take a couple deep breaths, everybody. And here we go. Okay. So you have this contract over here. Another buyer comes in late and says, we want to put in an offer. And you go, great. However, we executed one last night, but the seller is willing and open to receiving a backup offer. I wish every seller would take a backup offer. I wish every buyer would agree to be a backup. Okay. So somebody can come in and as the backup, this is not bad. It is negotiated just like the original contract. All agreements are met, negotiated. It becomes a backup only once that one is executed and you add the addendum. You have no addendum, you have no backup. Okay? So what does that backup say? Backup technically says, if contract number 1 falls out, contract number 2 immediately becomes the primary. Number 1. Okay. I don't know why more buyers don't do this, even in this market, because a lot of cash buyers are moving on. Now that interest rates are ticking up, a lot of buyers are losing their buying power, so now they can't qualify for the loan, so they're falling out. It's always good. I've gotten several clients, their house, by being the backup. It means they don't go back out to the market. You don't have to deal with multiple offers anymore. You immediately just take place number one.
What is the obligation of the buyer if he sign the backup? Can he change his mind?
He still has to turn in option and earnest money. And then no other timelines take place as a backup until he becomes the primary. Now, here's why we love Bob Baker in this office, for one of, 52 million reasons. Bob has a form or an explanation on our Market Center intranet that says, if you're the primary, that's what this means, and you're the secondary or the backup, option money and earnest money. Just give me an example of what do you pay when you're the only contract?
Your option, your earnest money.
Yeah, you pay, say, $500, and maybe your earnest money is 10,000. Okay? You're in a multiple offer situation, you're trying to win. Hey, I won, yay. Okay, now you have a different buyer coming in as a backup. We're gonna do 50, we're gonna do 1,000. Remaining balance to be paid. Once backup becomes primary. This is written in special provisions. One of the few things we put in special provisions. As the backup, we're going to put a partial payment of $50 down. We'll still write it in the contract this way, or if they're doing the same. But we're going to put in special provisions how option and earnest money are going to be split up. As the backup, option fee is going to be paid at $50. Earnest money fee paid at $1,000 with remaining balances to be paid in full once this backup becomes the primary. And I tell my buyer, you need to get ready to do that at any time. The reason why we do that is so your buyer can go make offers on something else. Now their cash isn't tied up in this backup. Buyer can terminate this backup at any time.
So they can
While they're
have
back.
option. No time limit.
No time limit. Provided the primary doesn't fall out, the seller
As long as it
notifies buyer or buyer's agent, you're number one now. People still wonder, well, why would we do that? Or what's the risk? The risk is you're a backup here. And then you go for house number 2. You're gonna put, let's say 1,000 earnest or 1,000 option and 25,000 earnest money. This gets accepted. Next day, that gets accepted. Now your buyer has a problem. Buyer is now in 2 contracts at once. Number 1, number 2. He found another house, he loved it. He waited to get accepted. Same day this got accepted, it's the same day that one hell out, and so now, Mr. Buyer, which house do you want? You have to pay the balance on these in full, because that's what you're required to do per the backup contract. You want this house? Or do you want that house? Because if this is accepted, you still have to pay your monies, and if you cancel, you're gonna lose that 1,000, which in these days, people are gambling anyway. They're like, okay. Yes, we wanted that house actually. So we'll stay with that one. We're gonna terminate this one. But you will lose your option money, just so you know.
Even they terminate within the option period, they still lose the money.
You always lose your option fee if you terminate during the option period. You get your earnest money back. That's why I only crossed out that one. He would get his earnest money back, but he has to deliver it in order to get it back. Some agents will never deliver it, which is really not how the game works. Bob has to deal with that on a fairly regular basis. So here's where the booger of the contract or the backup addendum comes in. Contract switch addendum is attached, AKA the backup, is binding upon execution by the parties, and the earnest money and option fee must be paid provided in the backup contract. That's what we talked about over there. What you have to find out is what day was the first contract, whoever was the primary. What day did theirs get executed? And you have to put that date in there. Then if that first contract does not terminate on or before X date, so there's some agents that are some buyers that'll say, how long is their option period in that primary? I'm only willing to wait that, 1 day after that. So you have to call the agent, the listing agent, and say, okay, my guys are putting in the backup, but we need to know some dates. So can you tell us when that date started, when you executed the first contract, and how many days are the option in the option period? She said they have 3-day option period. And I know the date of execution, right? So if the first date was 4/25, when does option start? Then we have 26, 27, 28. So then my buyer says, I'm only willing to wait till the day after that to make sure they drop out. I'm gonna put the 29th here. If it doesn't terminate before the 29th, I'm out. That's what that is saying. A buyer can wait all the way until that first one closes if they want to, or supposed to close. Some will leave that out there because they only had to put up this much money to stay in it. So yeah, we'll see if it closes or not. If we find something else in the meantime, we can withdraw this and then go with the new house. Or decide which house do I want. An amendment or modification to the first contract will not terminate the first contract. They can make all the changes they want in that contract. It means nothing to your buyer. If buyer has the unrestricted right to terminate the backup contract, the time for giving notice of termination begins on the effective date of the backup. Continues after the amended effective date and ends upon the expiration of the buyer's right to terminate on the backup contract. Oh, I hate this paragraph.
What makes you hate it?
Well, you have 3 days to turn in the option in earnest. That's really the only timeline that is in play on a backup. This reads like, Well, I guess we have to use that unrestricted right to terminate as the key to that paragraph. To me, it's just confusing. It's so wordy, which tells you that lawyers wrote it. It's just a wordy thing. Super wordy. Time is of the essence. Strict compliance with times and performance is stated herein. It's just a tough one because you're balancing so many things kind of all at once with your buyer. Thank you. All right, we've done that one, we've done that one. Do you have agreement between brokers for residential lease? Agreement between brokers for a residential lease?
Yeah.
You should, because I have the same stack right here. All right, so a lot of you may start with a lease before you get that's not the one we're looking at. So a bunch of you may start on leases before you get a purchase situation, and that's okay. You just have to understand there has to be an agreement because there's not a contract written between the two parties. There's a lease application that happens. There's a lease, the actual lease, but that lease doesn't involve us on the tenant side. So we have to have this to make sure that we're getting paid, right? So concerning the property between landlord and tenant, fee being paid, we typically do number one, 50%. Our office best practices is we do check number one and 1 month's 50% of 1 month's full rent. It's not to say that you couldn't negotiate X% of all rent that tenant obligated to pay under the primary term. So let's say the rent is $3,000 and we check number one. 1 month's rent is $3,000, you would receive $1,500. Let's say rent is $3,000 and they have a year's lease. It's 3,000 times 12. 36,000. Say you get 1% of that 1 year's lease. Right? That'd be about 3,600, yes? So I can either get paid 1,500 or I can try to get paid 3,600. Most landlords today are more willing to pay you the 50. Now, that doesn't mean they're guaranteeing, because that's what we want. On the MLS listing, they may have 35%, they may have 40%, they may have a flat fee of $500. What's on the MLS, you might have to put in number 3. So let's say it's a flat fee. I'm going to check this one and $500. If it's 35, 40, 50%, whatever, I'm gonna put it in box number 1. Some landlords will pay an agent if that agent or if that tenant renews, they will pay an additional fee. So a year down the road, when that lease ends up, they sign another year's lease, that landlord may be willing to pay you to keep your client in that house. I've not experienced that. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it may, particularly in some of these high-rise condo places, it may, because they want to keep, and/or an apartment, they want to keep their doors taken. If the landlord agrees to sell the property to the tenant during the term of the lease, which does happen, then how much of the sales price do we typically want on the buy side?
3%.
3%. So if they sell it to my client, your client, during the lease, we want 3%. Everybody signs here, everybody signs there. Okay. You'll see here, a W-9 form is needed. I showed you that on our intranet the other day, did I not, last week? You will need to send that W-9 with this form to the listing broker side. Now, there is one between, this is an agreement between brokers. There is a form that says agreement between broker and owner. If that owner is leasing it himself or manages his property his or herself, we have to do one to the owner because they're not a broker. They don't have a license of any kind. So it looks very similar all the way down. It's just named something different. Okay. Let's go to property subject 2, mandatory.
Can I have one question?
Yeah,
I know the buyer's market is not too good. How is the leasing market?
it's just as tough.
Is there stuff?
Yeah, because all those people that can't buy,
How's
they
it?
gotta live somewhere. So that's why they see all these apartments that keep going up. It's the dumbest idea in my opinion. Because by the time they get completed, we will have shifted again and now they're gonna have a lot of empty doors because now buyers will have more houses to choose from. Somebody always thinks it's a good idea. And I'm sure somebody will live in them, but they won't be at capacity like most of them are now. So yes, it's just as tough. Where my buyer's agent is working with a lease client right now. I think we've put in 6 applications and haven't gotten any yet. Yeah, it's just as tough. The prices are just as ridiculous,
Exactly.
you know? We moved her up in the 2,700 to 3,000 range just to try and find some. Okay, we wanted property subject to. You'll notice some of these are addendums and some of these are amendments, or some of these are agreements. What's the difference?
Then you turn in with the contract. And the amendment comes after it. It's not part of the contract.
Yeah, just use the first 3 letters. An addendum means you're adding something to the 1-to-4 contract, or 1-to-4 offer, really. An amendment, amend means to fix,
Change.
to change. I always think of mending socks. You know, grandma would sew up a hole in your socks or a hole in your jeans. Or else, okay, who's old enough to remember when they took that patch and you had a hole in your jeans, and so they always would put a patch over the hole in your jeans, right? Oh, it was stiff. I mean, like you can barely bend your knees after you didn't have any holes in your jeans. And now look like they're paying extra to have holes in their jeans today. I can't do it. I can't do it. I just know that my grandmothers and my mother up in heaven would all be saying, "What are you thinking?" Sorry. It's the thing to do and pay triple for it. Oh yeah, we had those patches. All right, so homeowner association. So the house your buyer is buying has a homeowner association. We have to send this form with the offer. Notice again, it is not for use with condominiums. That's a different. So subdivision information. Your buyer wants to know what the rules are in this neighborhood. They would like to know, they can see some stuff, but they would like to know, is there a community pool? Are there walking trails? Is there a tennis court? Are there basketball courts? Is there sand volleyball available? They want to know what the amenities are, but they also need to know what the rules and covenants are. Okay. So what's interesting is the house I sold just down the street here back in December. So they had all these houses in this neighborhood. Bunch of houses over here. There's a pool right here. These neighbors had access to that pool. These were not, they're a member to the HOA, but they did not have a upper level of membership that allowed them to use the community pool. Blew my mind. I'm like, you're right here. Like you drive by that to get to your house. It's just that when they built them, these are a little bit older, maybe by 5 years or more, and these were slightly newer, and they worked their way into having a pool. Okay, I don't get it, but okay. So every time I had an open house on that house, everybody's asking, so is there access to the pool? And I'm like, actually this street and the next street over, no. I don't know why, it's just they don't. So all right, so similar to the survey, box number 1 says that the seller's gonna do something, box number 2 says the buyer's gonna do something, and then the buyer either does or does not need something. We had the kind of similar scenarios on the survey. So in this case, within X number of days after the effective date of the contract, the seller shall obtain, pay for, and deliver the subdivision information to the buyer. If the seller delivers the subdivision information, buyer may terminate the contract within 3 days after the buyer receives the subdivision information prior to closing, whichever occurs first. If buyer does not, and I could have done this on a transaction recently, if the buyer does not receive the subdivision information, the buyer may terminate the contract. We were going to the closing table, like on a Tuesday. The seller side had still not delivered the HOA documents. Marcia's calling. I'm calling. We're calling title. We're calling the listing agent. We're like, where are the docs? Well, they had a lazy HOA they were working with, and they're like, we're so sorry. We've been requesting them. We don't have them. So guess what? You can't close. Because part of the contract has not been fulfilled, right? So I have to ask my buyer, this buyer, we do not have HOA docs in hand. Is that okay? You still want to buy this house? And they were like, yep, we'll do it. We'll go forward. An hour before we sat down at the closing table, amazingly, docs showed up. Buyer reviewed them real quick and said, we're good, let's go, close, let's do it. Now, most HOA companies will need at least 15 days. Some can get them done in 10, but I usually put 14. Because if you do it less than that, they charge the seller a rush fee. And that's just stupid. All somebody's doing is hitting a button and emailing it. However, I like to be respectful to the seller if I'm representing the buyer, and I usually put 14 days on it. They may already have the documents because maybe they already had a contract fall out. That's fine. You don't have to wait that number of days. Because really waiting that number of days before delivering them gives my client what? Your client what? Remember yesterday we talked about an extended option period? So there's several ways for that, and the HOA is one of them. So depending on the number of days you put, that's an option. Now they get another 3 days once they see it. So now add 3 to that. And now your buyer has, as many as 24 days of opting out. Maybe it's 18 days, maybe it's 13 days. Right? So agents that aren't thinking, they don't even use this as a considered out for their seller or the seller's buyer. They're saying, all right, well, we'll get the documents to you in X amount of days. What they don't realize is that's an option, that's an out for your buyer. And I've had to use it once when some other contingencies were already used up. We had not received the documents yet. As soon as we received them, we terminated. Because our guy couldn't get buyer financing, but we were already past that contingency. I couldn't use that contingency.
They use HOA.
So I called Bob Baker. I go, Bob, here's our situation. His very first and only question was, have you received the HOA docs? I said, no. And he goes, the minute you receive them, terminate. So a good listing agent is already going to have these on hand. They will have already ordered them. So that no matter what that date is, let's say it's 15 days, they deliver them on day 1. Buyer only has 3 days to look at them. That's a 4-day option period using the HOA as opposed to a 13, 18, 24, etc. I want to know, are you staying in the deal or you're not staying in the deal? I want to know long before 15, 20, 30 days, whatever the number is. So if I have this, there's no extended option for the buyer. And so upon delivery, they have 3 days. This one just says the buyer's going to pay for everything. And once the buyer receives the documents, the buyer can still terminate within 3 days. This one says buyer has received and approved the subdivision information before signing the contract. Buyer does or does not require an updated resale certificate. That may not always be up to the buyer. Title typically needs one, and if you're using a lender, the lender's going to require one anyway. So the buyer does require. Buyer requires an updated resale certificate. Seller at buyer's expense shall deliver it to the buyer within 10 days. So 2 separate things: division information, the rules and covenants, resale certificate. How much does that cost? Every HOA is a little different. I usually average it out depending on the price point of the homes. Lower price points is probably $200 for the documents and $200 for the resale certificate. It used to be like $175. Now it's $200 and $200. The higher the price point of the home, typically the higher price point of the HOA. So I'm averaging them out these days around $300 and $300. And if I'm high, I've judged too high, that just makes my buyer happier at closing or my seller happier at closing because they just don't have to pay as much. I kind of put prices up high so they get to close and they go, wow, our net's even bigger than we thought it would be. I'm like, yeah, funny how that happens. I have a lender that does the same. If the seller becomes aware of any material changes in the subdivision information, so maybe they have their annual meeting and they add in some new rules or they take away some rules, the seller just has to notify the buyer of any changes. Other than paragraphs A and D, the buyer shall pay any and all association fees, deposits, reserves, etc., associated with the transfer of the property not to exceed X, and the seller shall pay any excess. What this is talking about is if HOA dues, certain HOAs have these things called reserves, which protects their accounts, so to speak. So it may be that anytime a buyer buys in a certain neighborhood, there's $1,000 reserve fee or something to join the first time, and then that's just a one-time fee. So how much is the buyer willing to pay towards any fees outside of getting the documents or getting the resale certificate? Most people put like $100 in here. I've seen $250. I saw an offer for another agent in the office the other day. This was $500. Again, whatever makes the seller happiest in this market, or if you're in a multiple offer, is what you need to kind of put in there. It just ranges. It just ranges. And notice that it says not to exceed. So it could certainly be less than whatever the number is in here, but and the seller may not have to pay anything. Seller authorizes association to release and provide subdivision information. An updated resale certificate if requested by the buyer, title company, or broker of this, any broker to the sale. If the buyer does not require it, but the title company does or the lender does, who's going to pay for that? In this market, we're just telling the buyer to pay for it. Otherwise, normal markets, we would have seller pay for it. Okay. There's mud. There's mud. Crystal. There's a movie line. Oh, that Top Gun, or was that the other one? Tom Cruise is a Navy attorney, a JAG. He's yelling at Jack Nicholson. Few Good Men. Yeah, Few Good Men.
I only saw part of it.
Oh, you got it. Yeah, it's good. The court scene at the end is really good. All right, so we've already addressed, oh, let's go to sale of another property. We'll probably be stopping at about 10:40 because we have a class coming in here at 11. So just a couple more and then I'll let you go. Sale of other property. Telemarketing calls can you get before 10 a.m.? All right, sale of another property. We kind of talked about this the other day, yesterday. Your buyer wants to buy a house. He can only buy that house if he sells his own house first. That was our little example we did on the table. So this contract, this offer they're making to a new house is contingent upon the buyer's receipt of proceeds from the sale of the buyer's property at whatever your buyer's property is on or before X date. The contingency is not satisfied or waived by the buyer, the contract will terminate automatically and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. Okay. The seller accepts a written offer to sell the property. The seller shall notify the buyer of such acceptance, and seller requires buyer to waive the contingency. So let's talk about these two things kind of together. So we've got house number one. That's your buyer's house. He wants to buy, oops. House number two, but he can't buy number two till he has the money from number one. That's a contingency. That's what A is talking about. I need the receipts. I need the proceeds of my sale. And number two, I hate this thing being in the way. It really bugs me. Number two's offer to date of close that you put on the offer for the new house, let's say that's June 15th. This house needs to sell before that date. So according to that paragraph there, that date needs to be something like 6/13 or 6/14 or 6/10, whatever. Something fairly close to this date, but sometimes, like I said, I've done it all on one day. So that's what goes in here. House number one has to sell by this date to get the proceeds in order to buy your house, Mr. Seller. If I don't get the proceeds by that date that I put in there, this will terminate. There's no contract anymore. Okay, it's another reason to have a backup offer. The seller can still entertain other offers. The seller can still entertain other offers, of which he then goes back to this guy and says, hey, I have an offer I'd like to accept, but I can't accept it other than as a backup unless you can remove that contingency. If you can't remove that contingency, we can ask that you terminate. Seller requires buyer to waive the contingency. Buyer must waive the contingency on or before, usually it's 3 days after the seller gives notice to the buyer. Otherwise, contract will terminate automatically. Now, back to these dates. Say the date we had on there was by 6/10. And you're discussing this on 6/9. This seller, number one, is confident that his house is closing tomorrow. He will have his proceeds by that date. He will then say, yes, I'm gonna waive my contingency. I still need my proceeds, but I'm gonna waive the contingency to buy your house. Where was I taking that? Oh, he's gonna waive the contingency. Because he is confident his house, number one, is gonna sell on 6/10, which means he'll have the money he needs to close on the 15th. If he waives the contingency, he's still in the deal. He still gets to buy this house. That seller cannot entertain that other offer except as a backup. Now, where is the risk? It's in waiving that contingency.
He doesn't have to proceed.
He doesn't have a safety net. Right? For whatever reason, something happens on 6/10 to his buyer and it doesn't close. He's now waived his safety net of the contingency and he can't possibly get it sold to someone else by 6/15, he's now in default. So don't just randomly do these addendums or other forms without discussing it with your coach. Which, by the way, after you graduate at the end of this week, that's your next step. Immediately you go into the coaching program. There is a coaching contract you need to read and then sign before you can be in the coaching program. Totally different thing. Come to Coach's Corner this afternoon if you want to learn them. And I have a little more time. So because he's getting rid of his safety net, seller says, I want some more insurance. I've got the capability of taking your earnest money, but I want a little more insurance. So buyer may waive the contingency only by notifying seller of the waiver and depositing more money, more earnest money with the escrow agent or the title company. So seller says, really? You're gonna waive that contingency? I still think there's a chance on the roulette table that your first buyer may default and you may not be able to close on time, so give me some insurance. So maybe they had already paid $10,000 in earnest money. He may say, give me another 5,000 of security. But if you default, I'm gonna get 15 grand instead of 10 grand. Again, I know this all runs together and it's cray-cray, and that's why we are here for you. If buyer waives contingency and fails to close funding and funds solely due to the non-receipt of proceeds, buyer will be in default. If such default occurs, seller may exercise remedies specified in paragraph 15 of the contract. Sort of said that. Again, time is of the essence. You've got to be on time or have one of the transaction coordinators working with you to keep all these deadlines in play. I don't know how Marcia does it. She'll have like 50 different contracts she's running back there, and I don't know how she keeps them all on a timeline, but she does. She does. She does. I want to go over the T47 real quick. Property T47. Right, you represent a seller. What forms do you need a seller to sign? So you can take their listing. The first four absolutes. IABS.
Agreement.
What are the four critical forms everyone must sign?
Vendors,
Vendor,
fire fraud,
Where's that?
T4.
everyone has to sign these. I'm sorry, it's the ABA. It says we have a business affiliation with Fairway. Let's say Fairway goes away and we bring in Guild Mortgage. It would be an ABA for Guild Mortgage. Let's say they go away and Joe Schmo Marketing comes in and works with us. It would be Joe Schmo Marketing.
They also have the Keller Mortgage, and they have a Fairway, so they have two mortgage companies.
Oh, yeah. Because different programs for different people.
Oh, I see.
And there's all sorts of needs out there, so, yeah. Then you would have your listing agreement. Then you would have the seller's disclosure notice. Then you have the property T47 that goes with their survey. This is their homework. When we've signed all the paperwork, I say, now right before I leave, last thing I want to talk to you about is seller's disclosure, and I'll explain them how to fill that out just in general. It's pretty self-explanatory, but just in general. But then they have homework. If they have a survey, they need to go find that survey, and I try to have them find it before our appointment so that I can say, I want to take that survey and I'm now going to attach it to this. And you need to take this to get notarized. Okay? You go, well, I don't know what to fill in here. I go, it's easy. Put your date, name, your address. The description of the property is going to be the lot, block, and subdivision information. Description is the legal description, lot, block, subdivision information. And then what county is it in? You will probably be the one that gives them the lot and the block information. They probably know what subdivision they're in. They fill out nothing else until number 4. To the best of our actual knowledge and belief, since X date, this is the date they purchased the home on, that they took ownership of their home they're living in now. So my dad bought his house in August of 1981. So since August of 1981, there have been no construction projects, new structures, additional buildings, rooms, anything added that's a permanent structure to the property. No change in location of the boundary fences or walls. No construction products or projects adjoining or on immediately adjoining property lines, which encroaches on the property. So for example, I had a house I listed in Flower Mound. I don't know why this happened, but for some reason, when a fence got replaced because of some trees, do it this way, it's a little easier. This is his survey line is here. But the guys couldn't figure out how to do a fence around trees. So they just moved his fence line over here. Well, that's on the neighbor's yard. Well, it can happen as long as you just notify everybody. So that guy knew it and my guy knew it. We then let the buyer know, hey, we are aware that that fence line is past our known survey lines. Just to make you aware. Any replatting or easement dedications, replattings might happen, and I sold a property just up in Denison like this. It was 2 lots, right down the middle. It was 2 lots. My people turned it into 1 lot. So the survey had to be replatted as 1 lot. Okay. So if no changes, remember I drew the picture of here's what the property looks like, and now we've added a pool and a pergola and an extra garage. If none of that has happened, no changes whatsoever, except for the following, if none, insert none, they have to write the word in none. You cannot leave that blank. They must write in the word none. If something changed on the property, like for our house, we added a pool, I would write, except for the following, swimming pool. Just to notify everyone that what this survey looks like is not what the property now looks like. That's all they have to fill out. The top. Number 4, when did they buy the house? Are there any changes or were there none? Write the word none. They don't sign it until they're in front of the notary. Please do not let them sign it until they're in front of the notary. So this is kind of, that's a lot of writing right there, right? So what I do is I highlight what my clients need to touch on. You're going to fill out this. You're going to fill out this. You're gonna write the word none right here and I'll highlight it. If it's none, you write none. And then I will say, and hold on your signatures until you're with the notary. Otherwise, it's just a lot of words on a page to them. I get it. That's why we're here for them. Right? Now, are these all the agreements and all the addendums and all the amendments that exist? No. Those are the common ones we see and use on a fairly regular basis. Okay? You don't have, we're not gonna go through it, but there's also an amendment to the buyer's rep agreement, just like there was to a listing agreement. If someone's using propane gas in their neighborhood, they have to be notified, hey, you have a propane tank in your backyard and it's gonna have to be filled, which may cost you money. Now, they only fill them like once a year, maybe twice at most, depending on the size of the tank. Same thing with a sewer septic system. They have an aerobic septic system or an anaerobic septic system. There's a tank under there with stuff in it. Just know that stuff is buried in your yard and that tank will have to be cleaned out at some point. It needs to be serviced on a regular basis to make sure there's no leaks, cracks, or anything leaching into the ground. That's not there. We did lead-based paint, we did appraisal, we did the backup, we did the HOA. Okay, I think those are the majority ones. Any questions? I cannot believe there's not a question unless we already answered it while we were going through those. You're not going to remember all this. Worry about it. We know. We've all been there. Heck, some of these I don't use, but maybe once every 3 or 4 years, and I have to go back and go, what's this one for? What does that say? Oh, that's okay. That's why we're here. Anybody in here can help you. That's what makes this office pretty darn cool. All right, anything else?
What is a hydrostatic testing?
Hydrostatic testing is when a buyer has the house inspected and go away. Buyer has the house inspected. The inspector says, when I ran a leak test in the home, the water meter kept running when everything should have been turned off.
Leak test.
So it's a leak, but it's a specific leak. So hydrostatic test is a pressure test. So the inspector says, hey, your water meter's still running when everything's off. You need to get your plumbing checked. Plumber comes in and they mic camera it, which is what they should do, use a camera. They might put a ball in your outbound water. And I guess it's just the outbound water source. And they'll crank on the water to create pressure in the pipes to see, does water keep moving? That can indicate a leak. Well, now you got to get somebody in there with a camera to determine where the leak is. Fringes did this, and then stuff had to be repaired. All because the builder did not sink the pipes low enough. And thus the house is sitting on top of the pipes. So every time the house has been moving, it's been snapping her pipes, just little bitty cracks at a time. She had like 8 spots or something that had to be repaired. Cost her like 13 or 14 grand. So
Yeah, my house, they did it after they did the foundation work. After they repaired the foundation, they just move the house, they connect the pipe.
yeah, exactly. So it's a pressure test and pipes can break during the test. So you have to agree ahead of time. When we do this test, if you allow us, Mr. Seller, understand that the pipes may break. And now you have a repair you have to fix, but who's going to pay for it, the buyer or the seller? It's just an argument. So you just got to let them know. Who's gonna pay for it if they break? Guarantee if it has cast iron pipes, it might break. But my friend's house has PVCs. They just put the foundation too low on her pipes. Okay? Done. Thank you, Miss Jana. You're welcome. Somebody will see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Jana.
You're welcome, Tawana. Hey, I still need dates, Tawana. When you guys can get all the new agents together so I can come up. It
Oh,
needs to be
Lord, I
sometime
forgot
in
all about
May.
that.
Yeah. It needs to
Okay,
be
we're
sometime in
having
May.
Okay, we're having a meeting tomorrow. I'll bring it up.
Okay, thank you. Because I leave town June
welcome.
4th for 16 days, so
Okay,
I want to do it before I leave town.
okay.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. I will not, I told you I would be there today, but I'm not. I had a change in plans.
Okay. I'll put you on
Thanks.
Zoom.
Thank you, dear.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.